Since 2011, American Giant has been making everyday clothing with extraordinary effort. Not in far-off factories, but right here in the USA. We obsess over fabrics, fit, and details, because if you're going to wear it every day, it should feel great and last for years. From the cut of a hoodie to the finishing of a seam, nothing is overlooked. Our supply chain is tight-knit and local, which means less crisscrossing the country and more care in every step. The result is durable clothing, t-shirts, hoodies, sweatpants, and denim that become part of your life season after season. This isn't fast fashion, it's clothing made with purpose by people who care as much about how it's made as how it fits. Get 20% off your first order with code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com with code STAPLE20.
But then I realized in reading this decision, I was mistaken. It was worse than that. Half the reason they wanted to get rid of TikTok was because of the data slurping, but the other half was because of content-focused reasons. They did not like how TikTok was curating, moderating its platform, and they wanted to make it stop and silence any sort of editorial voice that was going to moderate it in this way.
Welcome to Law and Chaos. Today, we've got an interview with TechDirt's Kathy Jealous, who's going to walk us through the D.C. Circuit's opinion banning TikTok. And, for subscribers, we'll bring you up to speed on Rudy Giuliani's continuing efforts to dodge justice in 2 separate courts. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get after it. Happy Friday, Chaos Monkeys. I'm Liz Dye, and with me, as always, is Andrew Torres. Andrew, how are you?
I'm great, Liz, although it has been a day. How about you?
I mean, yes, it has been a day. You know what? The thing about having adult children, you're still a parent. And when they need you, you're still a parent and they still get to call on you. So God bless, and I love my kids. Okay, and speaking of kids, how about we talk about TikTok? Sir, have you heard of TikTok? Does your child like TikTok?
Hello, fellow kids.
Yeah.
I don't know why you're talking about my child. Like, I, for one, have all the knowledge of all the TikToks.
Yeah.
And since you and I are the same age,
Oh, no, we're
I
not.
imagine that
Yeah, the internet is a series of tubes. No. I do know what TikTok is. I assume that all of our listeners know. But okay, it's, an endless stream of short videos, user content uploaded. And it's delightful to people who have that kind of attention span. I'm not one of those people. I was addicted to Twitter because 180 characters is just fine by me. But it's a big thing. It's a very big thing with the youth.
The youths love the TikTok.
Except
I've been assured.
They may not get to have it for much longer, thanks to Congress and the D.C. Circuit Court, which said that it's going to get banned. So enjoy your endless stream while you can, kids. No, seriously. We're going to talk about this, but I would like to take us back for like 5 years or 4.5 years to the Trump administration, which is the genesis of this problem.
The world is about to do that in a month. So
I know, and I'm
you
sure
to.
it'll be much, much worse. But let's go back in our little time machine to June of 2020. When Donald Trump had decided that COVID wasn't real. So it was time for him to start going back to holding in-person rallies. And at his first one, I believe, is where he killed Herman Cain. That was the one where Herman Cain got COVID and died. And we're not going to make any jokes because that's not funny. But so that rally, it was a little bit of a cursed event because Trump decided that he would do some racisms, as was his wont, by holding a rally on Juneteenth in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the site of the massacre of the Black Wall Street. So that was really offensive and not accidental. Yeah, 2 big racist middle fingers. And since many Americans were at home with lots of time on their hands, they were spending a lot of time on TikTok, including this nice lady.
If you've been paying attention to the news, you know that Donald Trump is planning on holding his first political rally post-quarantine on June 19th in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, if you don't know why that's a big deal, I want you to Google 2 phrases, Juneteenth and Black Wall Street. you'll find out why people are really upset about this and why it's a slap in the face to the Black community. Somebody on another TikTok post commented that he was offering 2 free tickets on his campaign website to go to this rally. So I went and investigated it. It's 2 free tickets per cell phone number, because when you register, you have to give them your cell phone number. They send you a code, you put the code in, and your tickets are reserved for you. So this probably means, having worked on a political campaign this past fall, it probably means that I'll start getting text messages from his campaign. All I have to do to get rid of those is text stop. That's all you have to do. Once you text stop, they have to stop texting you. That's the law. They have to leave you alone. So I recommend that all of those of us that want to see this 19,000 seat auditorium barely filled or completely empty, go reserve tickets now and leave him standing there alone on the stage. What do you say?
So I believe that woman's name is
that.
Yeah, I believe that woman's name is Mary Laup, maybe Mary Jo Laup, and she suggested that it would be really, really funny for everyone to reserve as many tickets as possible at this Tulsa rally to prank Trump and the Trump campaign. And the Trump campaign fell for it hook, line, and sinker, was so excited they were going to have 100,000 people. They had overflow attendee space, which is not what they had. What they had instead was like a half-empty auditorium. But it was full enough of COVID to be the end of Herman Cain. At any rate, Trump got really mad at TikTok, and he decided he was going to take revenge on the entire platform. So in August, on August 6th of 2020, he put out an executive order saying he was going to ban TikTok. It said, TikTok, a video sharing mobile application owned by the Chinese company ByteDance Limited, has reportedly been downloaded over 175 million times in the United States and over 1 billion times globally. TikTok automatically captures vast swaths of information from its users, including internet and other network activity information, such as location data and browsing and search histories. This data collection threatens to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information, potentially allowing China to track the locations of federal employees and contractors, build dossiers of personal information for blackmail, and conduct corporate espionage. Okay, that might be true.
I mean, that data collection part is true, but
and it's true of every app that you have, right? It's true of Facebook. It's true of Instagram. Right. It's true of all of your apps. They are all slurping up your data. I don't think that this is particularly interesting. And by the way, you can buy that data, right? You can buy all that cell phone data. That's what they do outside like abortion clinics. That's the whole basis of the 2000 Mules thing, was like they bought up cell phone data or purported to buy it. Like you can buy all that on the open market, and so can China. But anyway, going on.
But if I shout China loudly enough.
But if you shout China, yeah, that's a good preview of what's about to happen. Going on. TikTok also reportedly censors content that the Chinese Communist Party deems politically sensitive, such as content concerning protests in Hong Kong and China's treatment of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. This mobile application may also be used for disinformation campaigns that benefit the Chinese Communist Party, such as when TikTok videos spread debunked conspiracy theories about the origins of the 2019 novel coronavirus.
Can we play that Simpsons clip of comic book guy going, ooh, a sarcasm detector? That's real useful. I'm sorry, my brain has broken.
Right. I mean, these are the people who, steadfastly insist that Russia did not try and interfere in the 2016 election. And for Donald Trump to pretend that he gives a shit about the Uyghurs is pretty thick. Yeah. Anyway, so he said that TikTok was going to get banned and that it was going to have to get bought by an American company, at which point hijinks ensued. So the first suitor was going to be Microsoft. Microsoft said it was going to buy it. And you guys, I know that it's going to be much worse this time around, but please listen to this clip. You'll know it when you hear it.
But if somebody, and whether it's Microsoft or somebody else buys it, that'll be interesting. I did say that if you buy it, whatever the price is, that goes to whoever owns it, because I guess it's China, essentially, but more than anything else. I said a very substantial portion of that price is going to have to come into the Treasury of the United States, because we're making it possible for this deal to happen. Right now, they don't have any rights unless we give it to them. So if we're going to give them the rights, then it has to come into this country. It's a little bit like the landlord-tenant. Without a lease, the tenant has nothing. So they pay what's called key money, or they pay something. But the United States should be reimbursed or should be paid a substantial amount of money.
A finder's fee. That mother scratcher wanted the U.S. government to extract a VIG from Microsoft.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
I mean, maybe you shouldn't put somebody with a mob mentality in charge of the government twice. But anyway, I understand.
Okay, so then the Microsoft deal fell through. And by the way, it was never clear at any point in this process that TikTok was for sale. But okay, we were on this side of the water and we were talking about who was going to buy it. Then there was a deal with Oracle, because Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle, runs Oracle, I can't remember his exact title, but he's a big Trump donor. And so that was going to be a big boondoggle for Oracle. And then it did not happen, in part because the Chinese government said, no, we're not going to sell it to you. No, that's not a thing. In fact, I believe that the Chinese government actually put a ban on exporting the algorithm, which is the secret sauce that makes the app work. It was very funny because Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, he had a plan, and his brain, his giant bigly brain plan was that ByteDance could sell TikTok without the algorithms, to which every person who had ever been on social media was like, nobody wants it without the algorithms. The algorithm is what makes the whole thing work. Otherwise, you just like have an undifferentiated feed. The whole point of TikTok is that it feeds you stuff that
otherwise you have hosting is what you
right,
have. Yeah.
Right. So on September 23rd, 2020, TikTok moved for an injunction on this forced sale, and trial courts in D.C. and in the Northern District of California both enjoined this sale. Anyway, so that didn't happen. Trump left office. And while the Biden administration didn't try and enforce the same ban, the issue didn't really go away. And you and I can talk about why it didn't go away, Andrew. I mean, I have, as I've said, I think it's mostly xenophobia, right? It's so easy to shout national defense and China and then say we've got to do all of these crazy things. And, I mean, you and I, Andrew, are tech gurus and we understand all of that. But I understand that the octogenarians in Congress are not all as hip to the technology as you and I are.
Yeah, I don't think this is a tech issue. I think this is a democratic lack of spine issue, right? And it stems from the fact that Donald Trump is, we can say this without fear of being sued because this has been verified by the Republican Senate Judiciary Committee, is the preferred candidate of Vladimir Putin's Russia. They actively intervened in the 2016 election to boost his chances and undermine Hillary Clinton's chances. So he may not be a willing Russian agent, but that just means that he is a useful idiot. And so Republicans have tried very, very hard to craft a narrative that Democrats must also be in the thrall of some hostile foreign power. They've tried out Ukraine. That was very stupid and didn't work. So the thing that's kind of stuck, though, is Biden is really an agent of China. And so to prove that Biden is not an agent of China, but so to prove that they're not, Democrats have been lining up to prove that they are just as tough on China as the Republicans. And all of that led to passage of the 2024 Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, or PAFACA.
PAFACA.
It's no FACEORP, but it is an acronym. I need to tell you, that bill passed 352 to 65 in the House and 79 to 18 in the Senate. And of those 18 in opposition, 15 were some of the very worst monsters in the Senate. I'm not going to detail, but pick a horrible Republican senator who you hate. They probably were part of that 15. Plus, Bernie Sanders and Peter Welch from Vermont, so the state of Vermont, and Jeff Merkey of Oregon. It was signed into law by President Biden. This is basically, I don't know, the most bipartisan thing to pass out of the entire Biden administration. So a lot of this is on us.
I know. We always get outflanked on this, right? And it's, first of all, I'm not really sure why anybody is like, yeah, let me line up and put my name on a bill that is going to take TikTok away from, young people. Like, are you people nuts? But I also think if we don't stand up and say, like, this is stupid, you're fear-mongering about nothing, if we jump on the bandwagon about every time anyone shouts China, like, then people will just shout China more to get us to do stupid shit like this. And the same with children. Like, we haven't had anyone on to talk about the COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, which is so bad. I mean, I know we've talked about it a little bit with Corbin and Ari when they've been on, but it's the same as they shout, for the children, and we go like, oh yeah, let's just like violate the First Amendment. Crazy.
I remember vividly, as a very, very young teenager, the satanic panic of the late 80s and early 90s, which affected my beloved heavy metal music. And Democrats got played then too, right?
Yeah.
Christian moralists lined up, and for whatever reason, it wound up being Tipper Gore and a bunch of
freaking Gore.
Right. And a bunch of Democrats who were like, we're happy to partner with you censorship happy Christian nationalists because we're worried about the kids. It's bad. We need to make our
Stand
side
for
do better.
nothing,
Anyway,
fall for everything.
Yep. Anyway, PAFACA is codified at 15 USC section 9901. It is actually in the notes section. It's a little bit weird, but here's what it says in relevant part. It says, prohibition of foreign adversary controlled applications. It shall be unlawful for an entity to distribute, maintain, or update, or enable, said, a foreign adversary controlled application, right, within the United States. And then, basically it means a social media company. And then that text defines a foreign adversary country by reference to 10 USC section 4872 D2. And if you don't have the US code memorized, A, shame on you. That's required reading for all of our listeners. B, that's an export control act. Those are countries to whom we cannot sell sensitive materials. And there are only 4, right? Those 4 are North Korea, the Russian Federation, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the People's Republic of China. Now, Russia, North Korea, and Iran don't control any social media sites. China doesn't either, right? But by the definition of the act, they do.
Well, they do. I mean, look, they do. They
Fair.
have, they have WeChat. They have a lot of others. That's
Withdraw.
fair.
Yes. So, under the act's terms, they take effect within 270 days of passage, which is January 19th, 2025. You may recognize that as one day before Donald Trump takes office. And pursuant to the act, TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, could sell off TikTok in order to comply with it. But as we're going to talk about with Kathy, no, look, I do business transactions on a much, much smaller scale than TikTok, which would be valued in the billions of dollars. And you can't do that in the next 6 weeks, right? That if you do, you'll wind up with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter for 5 times its value, right? It's ridiculous. These things don't happen in that kind of a time frame.
Yeah, even if China were interested in selling, which it is not, they've already said they're not going to do it. And to be fair, why would they? We've already blinked twice on this one,
and it's going to be a third time.
100% it's going to be a third time. Yeah. I'm not sure how, but okay, going on.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. But look, if nothing happens, the law will shut down TikTok on January 19th, unless there is an injunction or some other process that happens. And just a little bit of law geekery in the weeds, to be clear, there is a mechanism in the law for the president to give a one-time 90-day exchange. It says only once, and it's for 90 days. But that has to be a certification in writing to Congress that the entity, and these all say, the entity, but they mean TikTok, right? But that TikTok is executing a qualified divestiture. There has been evidence of significant progress. None of that is going to happen. So there will be no extension from the presidency, right? This is in the hands of the judiciary right now.
Yes. And you and I were joking, but Donald Trump is very hot to be the one who saves TikTok, maybe so he can extract that finder's fee, the key fee, or whatever the hell it is that he thinks he's going to get the security deposit. But he has kind of intimated that he's going to sweep in and save the day here. I don't know, because he won't be president until the day after it goes into effect, but we shall see.
Yeah, I'm sure that he's going to take credit for reducing inflation, which has been going down for a year as well. So anyway, that's not relevant here. We're obviously going to talk about the opinion. So let me set up the litigation. We're going to talk about this in detail with Kathy, but TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, moved to enjoin enforcement of the act. And procedurally, for reasons that Kathy will explain, that went straight to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit said, nope, no problem. We're not going to enjoin this law. It is perfectly fine. And what makes this such a crazy decision is that court said that strict scrutiny applies, the highest level of scrutiny in an equal protection challenge. And the reason why strict scrutiny applied was because while the law restricted the freedom of speech, both of TikTok itself and of the millions and millions of people to post content on TikTok, the government's proffered justification for why it wanted TikTok to be subject to this law, to be divested, was, quote, to limit China's ability to manipulate content covertly on the TikTok platform. So in other words, that is a content-based justification. That says, we don't like what a speaker is doing on this platform and we want to stop it. And that requires the highest level of legal justification. And the proffered justification here was, Liz, as you read, national security, right? Like, the evil communists are gonna, I don't know what. And here's just one more bit of where I've got this tagged in our notes as it's our fault. And by ours, I mean the Democrats for getting played. I want to read this bit of the opinion before we get into the interview. The DC Circuit said, our deference to the government's national security assessment is redoubled by the repeated acts of the political branches to address the national security problems presented by the TikTok platform. The act was the culmination of extensive bipartisan action by the Congress and by successive presidents. It was carefully drafted to deal only with control by a foreign adversary, and was part of a broader effort to counter a well-substantiated national security threat posed by the PRC. So in addition to giving into moral panics being a bad political strategy and being a bad electoral strategy, it also screws you in the courts. So if you're wondering whether Democrats should stand up to Republicans, there are 3 good reasons why they ought to.
Congratulations, Democrats. You played yourselves. Okay, we're going to be right back with this interview after this brief ad break, unless you are a subscriber at patreon.com/lawandchaospod or on lawandchaospod.com, in which case, not for you, baby.
With the state of today's economy, it's more important than ever to invest in products that last for years to come. As the seasons shift and get cooler, make sure your closet is stocked with durable layers that stand the test of time from American Giant. American Giant's clothes work harder and are wearable season after season. Their greatest hoodie ever made is made from the highest quality materials that are cut and sewn right here in the United States. So you're investing right back in your local community. Choosing American Giant means taking a stand for American manufacturing and hardworking Americans, something other mega corporations don't care about. From fleece to knit, all in a range of colors for versatile daily wear, American Giant delivers everyday pieces designed for everyday life. Feel the difference of quality, made-to-last clothes from American Giant. Get 20% off your first order with code STAPLE20 at american-giant.com. That's 20% off your first order at american-giant.com with code STAPLE20.
And we're back. Today we're here with Kathy Gellis. She is a lawyer in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she has a lot of thoughts about this TikTok ban. Kathy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get to this, can we just talk about how you are like a how do you get to be a tech lawyer journalist? You seem to wear a lot of hats.
I got here because I was really interested in journalism when I was growing up. I was a student journalist and I went off to college expecting to learn the trade and end up a professional journalist. But while I was at college, I discovered something called information technology, and it just fascinated me as this incredible medium for really achieving that sort of democratic potential of what the press was supposed to be able to do. And I just got so fascinated by it and inadvertently graduated in the mid-90s with the skills knowing how to make a website. So I ended up with a career as a web developer, very conveniently located in Silicon Valley with those skills. Did that for a number of years in California and also Europe. But then as I wrote in my admissions essays for law school, I became alarmed that people who didn't understand the technology or how people used it were nevertheless regulating it. And I decided to become a lawyer so I could help them not regulate it badly. And
how's that going? Have you fixed that problem?
I'm here as part of that project because they have done it badly in the case we're going to discuss, and I'm going to articulate some of the reasons why and what really needs to happen differently.
Awesome. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about it in the first segment. So do you want to talk about what happened at the DC Circuit, how it got to the DC Circuit, and what the DC Circuit said?
So there had been a lot of chatter for a while about banning TikTok, and none of it came from a good place, although there are certain legitimate policy issues that are raised.
Hmm.
There probably is a data protection problem because there's a data protection problem with basically all digital technology, that there is a ton of data. That data is slurped up, and it's slurped up and then used by people who don't necessarily have the best interests of the people whose data they've slurped in mind. Plus there's privacy impacts.
Mhm.
And we
Right.
really need to have a conversation as a country about possibly having regulation that addresses the slurping problem that happens from all sorts of apps, foreign and domestic. But this kind of ended up like a pretext, because meanwhile, a lot of people were upset that people were using TikTok to communicate with each other and say things that some of the powers that be did not like, probably because they were critical of those powers that be. And so there was a
Uh-huh.
lot of rhetoric about thou shalt not, they must be banned, this is terrible, this is bad.
Right.
And somehow all this talk about must ban TikTok, which is farcical from a First Amendment perspective. This is a communications medium, and you have the government upset about how people are communicating. And somehow, where everybody should have said, duh, the First Amendment doesn't let us do it, the idea achieved escape velocity and ended up law. And
Yeah.
part of how it ended up law was law is generally challengeable, but
Hmm.
it can be less challengeable if, as part of the law, they clip its wings a little bit and restrict the jurisdiction of the courts to review it. Open question of exactly how constitutional that move is, but that's a thing that can happen. And it did happen in this context where they said, okay, if this is going to be challenged, it's going to go straight to the DC Circuit. So normally, if you challenge something, you end up at a district court. And in this case, they bypassed the district court and said, we're just going straight to the Court of Appeals, and it will consider any issues related to the constitutionality. And so that challenge was filed at the DC Circuit. They had briefs, they had amicus briefs, they had oral arguments. And I guess, how does time work? I think we're at last week. Last week, the DC Circuit issued its opinion, and it said, nope, nothing to see here. This is totally fine. We'll probably talk for
Was
the
that
rest of the time
expected?
exactly how they
Right.
said that, but too long, don't read. That's basically what they said. So,
Okay. So this case obviously was one that everybody was watching. Who wanted the ban and who didn't want the ban? Besides you, you didn't want the ban.
well, I'm not alone, but actually, one of the things that actually comes up in the decision is because the parties who challenged it were sort of saying there's a number of interests that wanted the ban, and they sort of found common cause, but they all had their different initiatives. There were some people who
Hmm.
wanted the ban because they were unhappy about what people were saying on the platform, and they wanted
Hmm.
to have some regulatory pressure that would cause the platform to go away, and therefore their ability to share these ideas to go away.
Right. I mean, there's been clearly a look. Facebook has for a long time been trying to kind of shiv TikTok as a competitor. That's where, I remember once I sort of snapped at my mother-in-law because my mother-in-law said, well, what about this Tide Pod challenge? And I said, that's just a bullshit story that Mark Zuckerberg is planting to try and get rid of TikTok. And that's kind of a reductive anecdote. And yet also, it can't be divorced from the fact that the American tech companies would very much like TikTok to go away so they could take that market.
Or at least some of the American tech companies. I actually think I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that all of them do, particularly any that are
Very fair.
smaller and a startup, because any sort of regulatory pressure that could cause TikTok to go away distorts the ecosystem, which makes it hard for them to exist. So really the only
Hmm.
ones are the big ones who seem to think that they can weather any sort of regulatory storm and could
Hmm.
not possibly be hurt by a precedent that makes TikTok go away and not them. And maybe also looking at the statute and thinking that, and maybe correctly, but maybe also glibly, that, oh, it would never touch them, or that any sort of judicial decision that would uphold the ban would uphold it with any sort of logic and rationale where they would never be affected by this. And I think a lot of that is wrong. I think
Hmm.
this decision that came out is a threat to everything, but that could be some of what was running through some of these larger companies' minds. And in terms of, okay, who was in favor of the ban, you have some people who don't like how people are using it to express themselves. You have some people who don't like it because it exists and it's taking away user base from them. You have some people who are legitimately concerned about the privacy issues and then compounding them with the fact that there is foreign ownership and American data is being slurped and possibly slurped and given to the control of something that is foreign, and maybe that does create some national security issues. So it's not to say that there was no reason and this was all a moral panic, but this doesn't all map to the same policy goal of why you would get rid of TikTok. And that matters because a lot of what that policy goal is, what are we doing when we ban TikTok, is something that has to survive constitutional scrutiny. And when you have this kind of disparate, different people have different reasons, and the court kind of glossed over these differences, but that should matter to the constitutional analysis. And unfortunately, here it didn't.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that this doesn't map cleanly. It's not like, liberals are for this and conservatives are against it. It's one of those that's just more complicated, and as you can tell from the opinion. But you were talking about scrutiny, and I think most of us are surprised by how this came out because it appears to be a speech ban, right?
It definitely affects First Amendment rights. It affects a variety of First Amendment rights, and it's been allowed to go ahead and affect all those First Amendment rights.
And so just to drill down on that, because this affects core First Amendment rights, the D.C. Circuit applied strict scrutiny. And, one of the things that we always say to our non-lawyer listeners is basically, if you get strict scrutiny, that means that the law is going to be struck down, right? It must be narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling governmental interest. And in this case, the D.C. Circuit said, yes, strict scrutiny applies, but we're going to hold that this law satisfies strict scrutiny. So as a lawyer, that shocked the hell out of me. I'm judging that it probably shocked the hell out of you as well.
Yes. There was, I think I was marking up my copy, and a number of WTFs are polluting my my copy of this decision as I read it. Let me just backtrack to one thing we were talking about the politics. There is some sort of common cause, like even the people who were unhappy with the speech. Sometimes you have them on both sides of the aisle. And you do see this where there are, I tend to view the TikTok ban as something that was initiated by the red side, but you also see a variety of policies proposed from the blue side that would also essentially narrow the ability of people to speak online. And sometimes they are so oppositional because they really don't agree about what the good speech is and what the bad speech is that they can't possibly reach escape velocity and become a law. But in this particular instance, you had enough people who were of the mind that TikTok is bad. Kids these days, it's rotting their mind. I mean, you get everything from video games were bad and rock music is bad, and all those arguments are sort of coming together. And then they could just kind of pick up a number of, the data protection people and the national security, and they could just get enough political capital together to turn this into a law. But you're right, it was bipartisan, and the court kept looking at it as bipartisan and kept looking at the fact that you had people from both sides of the aisle thinking it was a good idea, as it really credited the Congress to a very significant degree, even though the Congress has made a law that is now affecting speech interests.
Yeah, just to interrupt, the putative interest protected here is that China controls TikTok. It is a Chinese company. It's controlled by, I believe, ByteDance is the company. And that China will some sort of way use its algorithm to push pro-China, anti-Taiwan rhetoric or some other thing, that it will interfere in our elections, which is pretty funny since, Republicans spent the past 8 years insisting that Russia never interfered in our elections. But that's the putative justification, right? That it's a national security justification.
Well, it's at least some of it. One of the things that actually I realized I was mistaken on as I was reading the decision is I thought a lot of this was cover. Pretextual cover. Let's talk about the national security problem because of the data issue, that it's slurping too much private American data. That is the problem. And because of that reason, TikTok must be I mean, I'm saying banned, but the court is like, no, it's only just divested. But something has to happen to TikTok because the data is slurping. In which case, there's still a really critical constitutional question of, okay, the data slurpage is probably a legitimate policy concern, but is it narrowly tailored enough to ban TikTok because you are upset about the slurping of the data? And I think the answer is no, because the impact on First Amendment rights is so significant. But then I realized in reading this decision, I was mistaken. It was worse than that. Half the reason they wanted to get rid of TikTok was because of the data slurping, but the other half was because of content focused reasons. They did not like how TikTok was curating, moderating its platform, and they wanted to make it stop and get and silence any sort of editorial voice that was going to moderate it in this way. Now, the court just kind of glossed over that and said it would be totally fine if an American company was moderating it in the same way. We are only mad because it's China doing it, and China has been designated an enemy of America, so therefore it's bad when the enemy is doing it. But this doesn't even make sense, because why is it bad when the enemy is doing it, but it's okay if the non-enemy is doing it? Like, this is not particularly coherent. But there are those two things. They really did try to ban TikTok in order to go after expression.
Yeah, can we just drill down on that? Because I think maybe that's a thing that lawyers sort of intuitively understand and non-lawyers don't. What is TikTok's expressive conduct at issue here?
So we can look at this with the case that was decided last year, the Net Choice v. Moody. And these were cases that kind of caused the Supreme Court to think about editorial discretion as it applies to an internet platform. We already had some First Amendment precedent that talked about how, like, a newspaper, if a newspaper chooses what articles to run and not run, that's an example of editorial discretion. And we can sort of see a little more clearly that if the government were to say, thou shalt not run this sort of editorial, or thou must run this sort of editorial, that would create a First Amendment problem. And that was what the Supreme Court recognized in the early 70s in Miami Herald versus Tornillo, where they said, no, newspapers get to decide what they carry, and this is impinging on an expressive interest, an editorial interest, for the government to say you can or you must not or carry something. And so the case, the Moody versus the Net Choice v. Moody, was one that addressed, well, if you're an internet platform and you're choosing what user expression to facilitate or what user expression not to facilitate, or how to do it and what to amplify, what to organize, etc., that implicates the same sort of editorial discretion that it would in a newspaper. So that is TikTok's right that is impacted by this decision, because you actually had the government gunning for, we don't like how you're curating it, because the way you're curating it is representing the interests of China.
Yeah, I just want to really specifically make one thing clear, because I think part of what TikTok's expressive conduct is here is the algorithm, is the curation, right? Because we get lost, we kind of chase ourselves around here about Section 230 and the platform versus publisher distinction, which is kind of sort of silly, I think. And we also have all of these arguments about states like Florida and Texas saying that you kind of can't deplatform people, or you must run specific content. And that is an editorial decision which has First Amendment protection. And TikTok's algorithm, which, as we discussed in the introduction, China refuses to sell it, and Mnuchin, Stephen Mnuchin, said that he was going to kind of buy the platform without the algorithm. The algorithm is expressive conduct. The algorithm is what makes the platform valuable, which is why Mnuchin's proposal was so laughable. And the algorithm is protected. And on the converse side, we as consumers and our right to consume the algorithm or interact with the algorithm, that is also expressive conduct, isn't it? Or have I got that wrong?
Well, I think it could, but I think one of the things that the court also ignored was some of the First Amendment interests at stake are the platforms, and some of them are the people who use the platform, where we have, it impinges on users' ability to speak, their right and ability to speak if they no longer can speak on this platform. And it also impinges on their right to consume speech if the platform goes away and now they can't. They do, yeah. They should also, of course, have the the right to interact with the algorithm too. But it's really that they're interacting with expression, and they're interacting with
Right.
expression however it is organized. And this ban is saying no, you don't get to interact with the expression because the expression has been somehow touched by China. And that's just not.
Yeah.
It's that's really kind of what they're saying, and it's just not enough to overcome the First Amendment bar towards messing with how people get to interact with expression, because it's not just their only ability to express themselves, but to interact with expression. And this messes with it, and without any sufficient justification. It's really just, and I'll keep saying this, it's really just a lot of hand waving, and hand waving should not survive strict scrutiny.
Yeah, well, and that's actually kind of a perfect transition back. I think we, sort of walk the path around the standard of review question that I posed to you about 10 minutes ago in a productive way. But let's talk about what the court said. And then, I want, because, we're all sort of roughly on the same side here, but I do want to push back a little bit about the justification. So the panel's majority decision, right? There was also a concurrence by Judge Srinivasan that, we're probably not going to get to. But the holding was that strict scrutiny applied to this law, and it applied because First Amendment expressive conduct was implicated. And in particular, that part of the justification involved the content itself, right? And you've alluded to that, Kathy, in talking about, a desire to avoid, misleading, editorializing, curating, that sort of thing. So I do not know. I'm going to ask this as a specific question. I do not know of another case, another First Amendment case in the modern era, which said that restrictions on speech survive strict scrutiny. Do you? I've literally never seen that before.
I mean, I accept that there could be cases out there I don't know about, but from talking to other people, the same people you were seeing on the internet when you saw me complain, it would appear no. Because normally, if you want to, it's all very distorted about why do we have strict scrutiny. We have the right to free speech. And that basically means when the First Amendment says make no law, that means make no law. So if a law is going to get made anyway, and then if it's going to be allowed, it has to be narrow. We really want to thread a very tiny needle to say something really, really, really bad will happen unless we happen to do this. And don't worry, this is a very small particularized thing because the imposition will hurt speech. So yeah, to get to what you say, the whole point is if it hurts speech, strict scrutiny applies, and it is going to have a really hard time, overcoming that constitutional bar because it hurts speech. So if you see the speech getting hurt, that is reason to not allow it unless it is something where it's being so careful and so narrowly tailored. It's really the only choice we had to do it, and we're going to really narrow the impact, narrow that constitutional injury, and only do it because we have absolutely nothing else to throw at it. And this wasn't the case. And the decision, again, is hand wavy about was there another choice? And it really sort of ended up giving a rational basis, rationale for why to do it. And rationale basis is like, did it have kind of a good reason to do it? Yeah, okay, there was a national security problem. National security is important. So this would seem to address it the way it understood the problem. So they kind of shoehorned a rational basis analysis into something that they had acknowledged probably needed to be strict scrutiny.
Oh, interesting.
Right, the lowest level of scrutiny for
Right.
what would be the highest level of scrutiny. But I want to drill down on your answer just to make it totally clear for the listeners. How did the DC Circuit get there, right? Like you've articulated, look, this is a compelling constitutional right. The law has to be super narrowly tailored. It has to be in service of a compelling government interest. What did the DC Circuit say that got them over that, those two rather large obstacles?
One thing that is sort of worth noting is that I almost don't want to give them too much credit that they went with heightened scrutiny, that they went with strict scrutiny, because they kind of didn't. They might have done us a little bit of a favor if they actually ruled that strict scrutiny was the appropriate standard. Instead, what they decided to do was use it just sort of as a logical framework to say, well, if we can clear that, then we're definitely good. Whereas if they had decided that a lesser level of scrutiny was sufficient and their analysis cleared that, it would leave room for, yeah, okay, but if they actually used the right level of scrutiny, they would have found that this law is unconstitutional. And so it would impugn the outcome based on, well, they used the wrong type of analysis. So here they kind of like cleared the way to say, for the sake of argument, we're going to use the highest level of scrutiny. So when we clear that, we're serious and this is totally a constitutional law.
Okay, and Kathy, we are going to take a quick break to play a couple of ads, and then we will be back with our interview right after that.
Okay, so now we've talked about their reasoning. What did they order TikTok to do? I mean, did TikTok disappear? I think my kids can still scroll it.
No, nothing would happen right away, or at least not right away in terms of decision was last week, and nothing would happen that quickly. TikTok has a problem. There is a ticking clock. That this statute hard-coded, you better be divested by January 19th, 2025. And TikTok, rather than cause itself to be divested, instead challenged this. But now they lost the challenge. And so there's a ticking clock with, what are we at, like 6 weeks or something like that, where what would happen.
And practically, there's no way for TikTok to divest itself in 6 weeks. I mean, this transaction, even if they were willing to do that, it would just practically not be possible.
It's ill-advised to do mergers and acquisitions and takeovers and due diligence in 6 weeks. I mean, stuff happens, but stuff is basically happening at the point of a regulatory gun, and that is not going to get good results for everybody. There's going to be some inequitability if that's what happened. Well, then, so it's not quite clear what its choices are. It's also waiting for the mandate to be issued, and nothing happens until the DC Circuit. They've ruled, but the ruling doesn't do something, but then there's a mandate, and the mandate kind of like etches that ruling into stone. That would, I think, typically trail in about a week, but it doesn't want that to happen, because once that happens, then everything starts to be put in motion. So it has done one thing so far, which is to go back, and I think this is in front of the DC Circuit. It's asked for essentially a new injunction to say and I'm thinking of it in terms of they've asked for a stay of the mandate, but I think they're asking for something more than that they want nothing counts, put this on hold, that the law is enjoined at least temporarily to give it enough time for it to take a next appellate step. Now, what that next appellate step would be, I'm not quite sure. In theory, I mean, what my hope would be that there would be a petition for rehearing on bank, that we've only had one 3-judge panel take a look at this. It's kind of ugly. It's really inconsistent with previous precedent. Let's back up and let the rest of the DC Circuit take another look at it, in which case I would want to see a petition for rehearing on bank. And if it's on bank, it means the rest of the DC Circuit will take a look. And if that were granted, then sometimes the judges just redo things on their own. Sometimes when they redo it, they say same result, but sometimes they call for briefing. Sometimes they call for oral argument. And there also might be a stage in between where if they file a petition for rehearing, then there might be a chance for amici to show up and say, dear DC Circuit, you really need to take a second look at this case. And so it would be an opportunity for advocacy from the rest of the community to be able to do that. But I think that would be due tomorrow. Sometimes extensions can be gotten. I don't know if they're looking for one. And the other thing that confuses me a little bit is TikTok is just one of the people who challenge this. There's also at least 2 other buckets of petitioners, and one of the buckets is TikTok users. And I'm not quite sure if they're getting represented together or separately, but they may, or what the consensus would be about what the next step is. But those are a bunch of interests that would need to make a decision. Oh, and the other thing that in theory could happen, and I did propose this to somebody online, was the court itself could, on its own motion, decide, like start internally casting votes for, I think we should revisit this, in which case I was really hoping that that would happen and we wouldn't have to do any briefing and the court could fix this on their own.
Right.
But let's assume none of that happens. There is no extension. The next step would be that they would do most likely the next step would be a cert petition in front of the US Supreme Court, which would basically be, you don't get a next level of appeal automatically from the courts of appeals to the Supreme Court. You get it automatically for the most part from district to the Court of Appeals, but we never had that lower level. So there's no appeal by right. And I don't believe the statute was written with an appeal by right. Sometimes that can happen where you go up to the Supreme Court. So they have to do what we're all calling a cert petition, which is basically, dear Supreme Court, please, 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 this was a mess. Take another look. Yeah. And then you hope that the Supreme Court grants that review, and then everybody go briefs on the merits instead and said, okay, now that you're thinking about it, here's what needs to happen instead. I would expect that to happen. I think the other question that I paused on was whether there would be an attempt to have some sort of litigation on what is commonly referred to as the shadow docket, where you're looking for the Supreme Court to use whatever authority it has to sort of take control of how the litigation is progressing. And this is quite controversial, but if you're desperate, you use what you've got, and you might try to summon those forces if you can.
I see what you're saying. So what do you think will happen here? I mean, if you had to take a guess, it seems, it's such a weird ruling. It feels like it can't possibly happen. It would be so momentous to kind of shut this thing down. But that is indeed what the circuit has said.
Well, I think for the crystal ball, I think as of, and I know like we're recording and releasing on a different day, I think we'll know more as of December 13th, because I think that's when some deadlines will kind of come and go, and we will see. I know that in terms of asking for the preliminary injunction, I believe that their brief asking for it is in, and I saw that the government's brief was in. I don't know if there will be another round where they get to follow up on it, but that went in as of yesterday. So I think it's a ticking clock for whether I guess they're waiting for the DC Circuit to do something, maybe give the preliminary injunction. And if a certain amount of time passes, then they'd probably go to the Supreme Court and ask for a slowdown. I'm hoping yes, because under principles of justice, American law typically has not wanted to be disruptive when there's a chance of ruinous injury that may be reversed. And you've got First Amendment issues here. This is pretty significant. This is a large company. The interests that are affected here are really sort of like status quo really is the thing that the law should be supporting here. And if it doesn't, I think we have a separate issue to complain about, which is, what does it mean for potential constitutional injuries that can be allowed to happen before any chance of abating them? Because if that's something that American law is now doing, we have a separate constitutional problem beyond just the impingement on the First Amendment and things like that. So I'm hoping that some court somehow will step in and just slow things down. But then there's also the possibility of political things. It's possible, I think, that President Biden may have some options. Then if Trump takes office, he has some options. One of the things that TikTok has intimated is that Trump has now said that he doesn't mean it and doesn't want to ban TikTok. I find this, I'm not going to put
I think he doesn't. I think he would like to save TikTok. That's my personal feeling.
I think he might too, and also to look like the hero, but also to get people in his debt. But I think he's also the guy who started this, so it's all very confusing. And basically, we should not be down to just his whims for whether we get to keep our internet platform and communicating on it. So I'm really hoping that some of the grown-ups who are just, supposed to make sure our constitutional order holds together, at least call a timeout and let the dust settle and let us proceed in a less, alacritive manner, because this is a false timeline. I think a lot of the sense of urgency is really artificial, and hopefully that will be recognized, especially since the impact of causing the divestment will be so severe.
Okay. Thank you so very much. That was super, super interesting. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks very much.
And we're back. Well, Liz, that was a great interview.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. Didn't reduce my blood pressure at all. But in thinking about sort of the next steps, I thought Kathy really made 2 points that I hadn't thought about beforehand that I think are really worth emphasizing. Right? And the first is that the DC Circuit has not yet issued its mandate in this case. And as we've talked about on the show before, right, mandate is when the legal implication of their opinion begins to run. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing that can be done. TikTok has, in fact, moved for a preliminary injunction. We will list that in the show notes. You can go read it. But there's nothing to do until the mandate issues. And that kind of ties into the second part, which is, if you're thinking, I don't know how much I like appealing anything to the U.S. Supreme Court, you're not alone. And I will be interested as the show drops to see if TikTok petitions for a full review of the entire DC Circuit en banc. I think that's an excellent strategy. And certainly TikTok has the money and the lawyers to do that. This is a pretty, this was not an F panel, right? This was not, Naomi Rao, Justin Walker, and somebody else.
Srinivasan's like our age. Srinivasan is the judge who wrote the opinion. I don't understand how they.
Srinivasan wrote the concurrence. It was Doug Ginsburg, who is
that's right,
our parents' age, who wrote the majority opinion.
Yeah.
And and Naomi Rao, who was on the panel, who, as I said to you, like, if I were a judge on the DC Circuit and Naomi Rao said, I agree with you, it would at least cause me to rethink my opinion in the case.
True. Absolutely. Okay. It's funny. I just want to add one thing before we leave. The way that this went down the first time around when Trump was in office was that he said, National Security Emergency, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or whatever. The IEPA is the acronym, and I believe that's what it stands for. And he's made it clear that's how he intends to govern this time around, that he's going to say, it's an emergency, I have to do it. It's an emergency, I get to steal funds from base housing to build the FU Mexico wall, or it's an emergency, I get to recess appoint all of these crazy people. And, this is just yet another instance of where we allowed Trump to say, it's an emergency, to do something he had no right to do. And now we're stuck with it, and it's going to be codified into law and blessed by the courts. I think they'll go back on it, but we've already enforced or reinforced this really dangerous behavior, dangerous to democracy.
Yeah, and again, let me point out, since the through line to this episode is Democrats allowing themselves to get played, right? The justification that Democrats have given for not pushing back on the presidential use of emergency powers has been, well, we want to be able to use those powers when it's our guy in office. We had our guy in office during a pandemic, and it did not stop Republicans from challenging everything he did, from mask mandates on down. So, there's no unilateral disarmament here, right? Like, they've already stomped all over our legitimate use of emergency powers. We should push back on their illegitimate use of emergency powers. Couldn't agree with you more. And before we leave this story, I just want to say, if TikTok does not petition for rehearing en banc from the full DC Circuit, if they have to file a petition for a writ of certiorari with the U.S. Supreme Court, I believe that the U.S. Supreme Court will issue at minimum an administrative stay of the DC Circuit's mandate and permit briefing, right? Like, I don't think this ban is going to go into effect on January 19th. I don't think Donald Trump is going to ride to the rescue on it either way. Like, I think the courts are going to stop it. I don't know, man. I've been wrong about a lot of stuff lately, so I hope I'm not wrong on that one.
All right. That is going to do it for us today. Thank you guys so much. We will be back with written content on Monday and another show on Tuesday.
What? Wait. If you are a subscriber, we do have a subscriber bonus for you, so don't hang up yet.
All right. Have a lovely weekend, guys.
Law and Chaos Podcast is a production of Raise Ipsa Media, LLC, is intended solely as entertainment, does not constitute legal advice, and does not form an attorney-client relationship. This show is researched and written by Liz Dye and produced by Bryce Blankenagel. Law and Chaos Pod, copyright 2024, Raise Ipsa Media, LLC, all rights reserved.